Hello everyone, welcome to the live stream. Sorry for the slight delay there, just getting a few things sorted before we went live into unknown territory. I'm actually using my son's MacBook Air now to do this. I won't even begin to go in some of the IT dramas I've had over the last week or so. All I can say is if you've got a nice MacBook Pro, but it's like, 2 or 3 years old, do not download the new Tahoe operating system, because it completely threw mine, just slowed everything down incredibly. And when I went to the Apple store about it, they said, sort of shrugged and said, yeah. So anyway, they refused obviously to put it back to Sonoma. If you're not a Mac guy, don't worry about it, or Mac person, don't worry about this chat. It'll soon be over, but they wouldn't do it. So I just, as a short makeshift thing, I'm going to use this MacBook Air today, and I hope it's working well. And then I'll be getting a new MacBook Pro, I guess, next week. Not much left of the bank account after that, obviously. It's always the way with Mac, isn't it? Anyway, here I am doing that. Probably, I should be switching to PC or something, who knows? But anyway, it's all working hopefully quite well. Anyway, welcome from wherever you are around the world, whatever time zone you are in. I've been chatting this morning to various friends and colleagues and associates in Formula One about the situation with Max's power unit change before the race on the Saturday night in Brazil. A lot was made of that power unit change in terms of how he went in the race on Sunday. I don't buy that. To me, power units are power units. Yeah, you can get a little bit more out of a new one, but what we saw from Max was not in any way related to that power unit change. All of that was making great use of the medium tyre, of which he had 2 new sets, which is a huge advantage as a result of the way he ran the tyres didn't run the mediums on Friday. But beyond that, it was also fortuitous with the hard tyre effectively disappearing with a free pit stop, and Max just being Max, being totally brilliant. So yeah, but Andrea Stella of McLaren has said that because Laurent Mekies has made it clear that the power unit change was not made for reliability reasons and is outside the normal, outside the 4 power units, it must therefore be subject to a cost cap penalty, which a lot of my colleagues who work in Formula One were not aware of the distinction between reliability and performance when it comes to power unit changes and usage relative to the cost cap. No surprise there, because I've always said the cost cap thing for me is a load of old rubbish, and we shouldn't have it in Formula One anyway, because there are so many loopholes. And here's a very good example. How do you define reliability relative to performance when the teams and the engine builders are quite capable, 3 races in advance probably, of knowing which part is going to fail, and to preempt that failure, do an engine change? So is that a power unit change because of potential reliability issues or not? Where do you draw the line? And to me, it's absolutely ridiculous. And if you take a 10-place grid penalty for an engine change, why should you then be subjected to some sort of, I presume it's going to be some sort of financial penalty if this is looked at by the FIA and they agree with McLaren. They will say, yeah, there'll be a financial penalty for Red Bull. I don't think it won't be the same as if they win the championship and they have less usage of computational fluid dynamics or a wind tunnel. It won't be that. Probably it'll be a financial penalty. But to me, this is crazy. It really is crazy. They should be looking at the rule in a completely different dimension, which is that if a driver has to incur a 10-place grid penalty for the engine change, it's completely unfair for the driver, because it's not actually his fault. And it's nothing to do with the way he drives. It's nothing to do with passing somebody the wrong way or being late for a driver's briefing or whatever you want to do, or speeding in the pit lane. It's entirely in the hands of the team. And why should the driver have to pay the penalty for that? And one day it will come down to, and I hope it doesn't even this year actually, it could come down to the last race, a championship contender being on the pole and has to take a 10-place grid penalty because of some engine change and loses the world championship as a result. And I think that would be absolutely appalling. We need to have the penalty specifically for the team and the engine, and not for the driver, is what I'm getting around to saying. And I wanted to say that at the start of the show, because I think this whole business of penalties and protests is so unsavory in Formula One, and I just hope we don't get any more of it. Anyway, enough of that. It's post Brazil. So much to talk about, and I think there'll be lots of questions and comments from you all, and we'll be getting onto those in a moment. But before we do, I had just before the show a very quick chat to Mark Slade, primarily about two issues. One, Max's race and his use of the tyres and how that all came about. Ferrari a little bit in the conversation as well, and also talking about that turn one incident in which Oscar Piastri got a 10-second penalty. And lo and behold, like me, Mark thinks it was completely unjust and totally wrong that Piastri did get that penalty. So with no more ado, here's the chat I had with Mark just literally within an hour ago. So Mark, as a result of the tyre usage on Friday, as it happened, and given that sort of free pit stop Max got on the hard tyre, he had two new sets of mediums going into the race, whereas McLaren and all the other teams really were in nothing like as good a shape because they're all running used sets with sort of 7 or 8 laps on them, in some cases more.
Absolutely.
And that probably showed up towards the end of the race, correct? That's when and Antonelli, I mean, his mediums were going off quite significantly, I think, right at the end, even though Max's softs were as well.
I think because I guess the teams were expecting it to be a one-stop hard medium race, so they'd all ditched a set of hards in P1 and used a set of mediums in P1, other than Red Bull, who used a set of softs instead. And Ferrari didn't use any mediums or softs in P1, so they would have had an extra set available as well, but they weren't really in position to make much use of that. Well, obviously, because then neither car finished the race. So it put, as it happens, because of the circumstances, it put Max in a very strong position because it turned into a 2-stop race for most people. And obviously that meant that all the cars, apart from Ferrari and Red Bull, had to make use of a used set, and in Lando's case, a pretty well-used set of mediums. And I think that was a big problem for McLaren because that meant that they had to use a set of softs during the race. But going back a bit earlier than that, even in the sprint race, they had, with the red flag, they'd switched to a set of softs, and that was probably, that saved their bacon come the race, because if they'd put another set of mediums on in the sprints, they'd have come into the race with even fewer sets of mediums.
Good point.
So they kind of lucked in a way, but I think it just shows that the majority of teams basically got the tyre choice wrong from the start of the weekend. And I'm surprised that they ran as many teams ran the mediums in P1 as they did, because we know that the tyres were all harder than were run in 2024. So to me, it's not surprising that the hard wasn't a good tyre. And combine that with the fact that track temperature dropped significantly on Sunday, really put that tyre completely out of the window. I'm surprised by the collective bad choice that was made.
Come back Ferrari, all is forgiven. Remember, they were running the hard, and we were saying, what are they doing running the hard?
But they let themselves down in another way, though, because they didn't give their drivers a chance to drive the car before sprint qualifying on a tyre that actually had decent levels of grip. And I'm quite convinced that would have been one of the reasons why they were less competitive than they should have been through the weekend. Obviously, Charles managed to get it together for qualifying and delivered an absolutely fantastic lap. But it was too late in the weekend, really. I guess he could have had a good race performance if he hadn't been taken out in that silly accident. But well,
let's talk about that silly accident now. What was your take on that?
I'm just astonished that Oscar Piastri got a penalty for that. You made the point about his Antonelli's poor restart, and I think you're absolutely right about that. It put him in a very weak position. But in the incident itself, they've clearly looked at Oscar locking his left front wheel as he dives up the inside of Kimi. But if you look at the onboard, Oscar's completely in control of his car at that point. I mean, the circuit is quite cambered, so the left front is very lightly loaded. It's not a surprise that it locked. It was the minimal of locks. It really didn't lock up dramatically. And there was no sign that the front of his car was really running wide into Kimi Antonelli's car. It was much more the case that Kimi drove, pulled over across and into Oscar. Now, technically, I suppose by the silly rules that we have now regarding positions of cars relative to each other, they say that Oscar wasn't far enough alongside Kimi to take the position, and that may be so, but Kimi still put himself at massive risk because he admitted he knew that Oscar was there. He put himself at massive risk of being taken out by cutting across in the way he did. And obviously, Charles Leclerc was completely blameless and just got taken out by the consequences of those actions. But I just don't see why Oscar got a penalty, because that's just an attempt to make an overtake on another car when that car's moving more slowly. It's the antithesis to me of what we should be seeing on track. I really don't understand it at all.
Totally agree. And speaking of antithesis, or maybe an alternative universe, what do you make of Kimi saying after the race that he made that slow restart because he had too much wheel spin, even though he was in third gear and everybody else is in second? Or am I completely going mad here?
I don't get that. I mean, the cars are funny in the way they deliver torque. You can actually have more torque at low revs than at higher revs, but and it's possible, given the low speed, that you're able to generate wheel spin in third. Maybe I guess that's why he probably anticipated that Lando was going to cruise up fairly close to the line and then go aggressively so as not to generate a tow into turn one. So maybe it was a conscious decision to go for third to avoid that problem. But, well, whatever he did, it didn't work out, that's for sure.
But just for my own peace of mind, it's easier to generate wheel spin in second than in third, correct?
Certainly. So I think he's saying that he went to third in order to try to reduce that likelihood. But I'm not sure that it's enough of a difference. I mean, for instance, most of the cars will start in second gear if the track's wet. But then the difference between first and second is much greater than the difference between second and third. So on a much grippier dry track, I'm struggling with the concept of starting in third gear at a restart, given that you're doing well over 100 Ks at that restart. To me, it's just a mistake, and he paid a price.
And the odd thing was, and it didn't affect anything, but the odd thing was by the time they got to sector 2 with some of those hairpins, everybody was taking them in third and he was using second.
Oh, right. Okay.
I just checked that because I wanted to see maybe it had a gearbox problem and was trying to avoid second gear or something. But actually, he was the only guy to take a couple of those hairpins in second on that first flying lap.
Well, it sounds like he might have spooked himself with the third gear usage and maybe getting wheel spin that he didn't expect, and then he's just completely baffled himself as to what's going on with third gear, and so he's used second potentially. I mean, the other thing is, I would say on a first lap, because the cars are generally going slower than they would do normally because of just being close together. We've seen drivers in the past use a shorter gear to gain an acceleration when other drivers just use what they're used to using. But this sounds a bit weird, and he needs to have a little think about that, I would have thought, and get his head together for the next time there's a rolling start.
I would have thought so. And I've got to get going, you've got to get going. But just as a final thought, it's the whole business of those safety car restarts is a unique thing, and because they're traveling very slowly, they're in control of the leader, and they're very closely bunched. And so therefore, the whole business of spreading out the grid as we did at once and making sure the first was staggered at one point to the P2 guy, and it was effectively the second row then, making sure there was space between them. All that goes out the window. They're incredibly closely bunched. And even more important, therefore, is not having a massive speed differential if you want to try to avoid some sort of first corner shunt.
Absolutely.
And we don't have any regulations governing that. It's an interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I'm glad in a way we don't, because I don't like all these regs. But if we're going to have these staggered grids with these 8 meters between the cars, and we're so worried about the first corner, let's look at the restart then, because in reality, that was the same as if you took a normal grid, it was almost the same as Antonelli stalling on the grid and then going. And that was the speed differential that everybody was living with as they went past him.
Absolutely. And I mean, the only regulations around it have been the change in approach to the leader as he approaches the line, where they've stopped the leader from slowing down and then speeding up after a certain point, haven't they? But it's not without risk. But I guess the speed differential is likely to be lower than if someone has a problem from the rolling start, and I guess that's why they do it. Obviously, we see in IndyCar racing they do rolling starts all the time, and quite a lot of them do end in mayhem. So it's not trouble-free.
Yeah,
practice.
Obviously the speeds are lower at the restart, but I'm talking about really repercussions at the next corner, whatever that is,
absolutely.
turn one, obviously. And that's why the field looked the way it did as they went into turn one at that restart.
And you're arriving at that corner at a much higher speed than you would have done
and
from
Kimi really
start.
should have been thinking, I've messed this up. I'm going to stay in the middle, make sure I just don't hit anybody and keep out.
I think that's the key to it, is that he's put himself in a weak position, and then very aggressively defended the position in the way that he shouldn't have. And he's just he knew where he was. He knew his speed was down. He knew the other car was there, and he's continued to drive to try to take the line. And I just, I don't understand. We see this other times as well when drivers just pull over very aggressively with the car on the inside and both cars end up spinning out. And to me, the teams should be pretty unhappy, in my opinion, about that sort of behaviour, because it often results in those cars leaving the track and not finishing the races. I guess on this occasion it paid off for him, but I think the FIA should be taking a different approach. I don't think you can apply a regulation to overtaking. They have to be considered individually on merit and the circumstances, because there are many, many factors that apply. And I just think they've kind of absolved themselves from responsibility by coming up with a regulation which may fit some circumstances but doesn't fit all circumstances. But if they blindly follow it, then they can just say, well, that's the regulation, it's not our fault. And I just think that's a bit sad, because it doesn't encourage racing. That's the prime thing that we should be trying to get to.
As ever, very well said, Mark, and I totally agree with you 100% on that. Well, just about everything you say. Thanks so much for your time. See you soon.
No problem.
Big thanks to Mark for that. Always brilliant to get his insight. He's actually sent a message after we chatted. He was thinking even more about the mess Kimi made of that restart and the fact that he was in third gear, everybody else was in second. He says, regarding Kimi's restart in third, if the revs drop low enough, he may have run into the rev region where the torque profile is adjusted to make the standing start easier to manage, and this may have made life difficult for him, of course, in the rolling start. The teams do play around with this on the basis that the only time the revs are that low will be at a standing start. It's possible to have more torque at lower revs. Also, the interaction between the ICE, the internal combustion engine, and the electrical power delivery can become confused in this mode. The drivers are often told not to short shift, for example, to avoid wheel spin, because it can have the opposite effect. Interesting, isn't it? All the technology that's going on now. Fundamentally, he says, the accelerator pedal should be seen as a torque controller, so the torque is not dependent entirely on engine revs. Interesting, isn't it? Well, I think it's interesting if you get your head around it all. Bottom line is, what was Kimi doing in third? Why was he going so slowly? And why didn't he make sure, having completely messed up that start, which is worse than, as I explained, in my opinion, it's worse than messing up a standing start, because at least there's space around you there. Why didn't he then just stay in the middle, do not move, and let everybody sort themselves out? Instead of which he then was aggressive into turn one, got away with it, and then drove brilliantly. And of course, a lot of people will probably not even remember what happened in that first corner. But to me, it was unbelievable. And I feel very bad for Charles Leclerc, because ultimately that was all caused by Kimi. And Charles' race was gone. And Kimi, Kimi drove really well, but Charles could have had a very good race too. He could have had a very good race for Ferrari. Speaking of which, and there probably will be questions and comments about this, but I got to get this off my chest as well. What is John Elkann, the chairman of Ferrari and Stellantis, a huge conglomerate that basically changed the face of Fiat forever when they merged with, what was it, Chrysler? And Fiat went from being what always used to be quite a nice car company to really boring cars. Anyway, that's another story. He apparently said last week, after Brazil, our drivers should focus on driving and talk less. What is that all about? I mean, what is his background in Formula One? Zero, I think. And secondly, what he should be saying, in my opinion, is everything should always be positive in a team. This comes back to the old Peter Collins thing, actually. Not Peter Collins, the racing driver. Peter Collins, my dear friend, who worked at Benetton and Lotus, and very good driver manager and driver talent spotter. And when we were growing up in Australia as kids, just going to races, he said to me once, he said, I can't stand the teams where even if the driver's running last and crossing the line last, the mechanics aren't on the pit wall, leaning over, cheering and clapping. That is what motor racing is all about. Everybody should always have their respect. And I agree with him 100%. And I remember that always stuck with me. And so to have John Elkann standing up, or wherever he said this, about Charles Leclerc and Sir Lewis Hamilton is beyond belief to me, because he should be saying, in his position as chairman of Ferrari, nothing but positive things all the time. We can do this. We can be together. Thanks to Charles and Lewis, we're doing a great job. Whatever you want, whatever platitudes you want to make, that's what should be coming from the chairman. But along the way, maybe an explanation as to why he failed to hire Adrian Newey and went ahead getting rid of Carlos Sainz and replacing him with Lewis. We've never had any explanation from him about that, why he hasn't signed or didn't give Freddie Vasseur the authority to sign Adrian Newey when he had the opportunity. And that needs to be, if he's going to say anything, he needs to be saying that. He needs to be saying something like, well, everybody wants to know why we didn't get Adrian. The reality is it was better for us to continue with our team of technology that we have, and we have total faith in them. We just need the support of the fans. The drivers are behind it 100%. Let's go for it. We've got 3 races now. We're going to win some of these. That's what it should be saying. But to start saying that Charles Leclerc and Sir Lewis Hamilton should talk less, what is that all about? I mean, how could he possibly say that? What does he know about Formula One? I mean, what he knows about Formula One wouldn't even fit on the fingernail of either driver, in my opinion. So, I think it's completely out of order that somebody whose background is obviously in big business and multinational deals is getting involved in something as idiosyncratic and difficult and convoluted as Formula One and the Ferrari team, which is 10 times more political than any other team on the grid, and saying that the solution to the problem is that the drivers need to talk less and drive more, focus more. I think it's deplorable, actually. And it's no wonder that they're in the trouble they're in, if that's the way it's going. And I see now why Freddie Vasseur is having so much difficulty getting the thing on the straight and narrow on a regular basis. Anyway, got that off my chest as well, because, it's needed to be said, I think. Right, next, first question is from... And we're doing it in the order of lining up on the poll, who's there first when I press the live button, which I actually did at 3 o'clock in the morning Spanish time. You'd be impressed. I suddenly woke up thinking, I think I forgot to make this public. So I got up and made it public, and there you go. Sorry about that. I actually got it all set up yesterday, but there's so many things you have to think about, aren't there? Anyway, Richard Freeman. I won't go through the numbers now because, as we know, they're sort of YouTube allocated, I think, aren't they? Morning, Peter. Are 2- and 3-wheel sidecars racing still relevant to short corner technique? Love what you're doing here. Best wishes, Rich. Well, 2-wheel, not as much. No, not really, because, as Leonard Setright, the great British journalist, once said, basically, the G-loading on a bike is 45 degrees. Okay, it can be, if you're one of the megastars, it's going to be 48, 50 degrees probably, but it's still limited to the angle at which you're going. And the amount of sweet spot that you can generate around maybe being a little bit more supple and being a little bit more flexible and having perfect rates of input, it's a much smaller sweet spot that you're generating. And whether that's enough, I don't know enough about MotoGP, and whether that's enough actually to start trading off lateral load against braking load with the angle you've got on the bike, I very much doubt. I knew Mike Hailwood pretty well, and we used to talk quite a lot about the relationship between bikes and Formula One. And he basically said, well, it's totally different. You've got to have the same skill set up to a certain point. And he had 2 different skill sets, one for bikes and one for Formula One. And he was really good in Formula 2 and Formula 5000. And he was really good, Mike Hailwood, very underrated driver, I think. But he never really related anything he did on a race car to what he could do or had done on a bike. It was totally different. John Surtees the same, really. So, yeah, I don't think there is any relationship. Sidecar, adding that, I don't think that helps at all, because all that does is just stops the bike leaning, doesn't it, on the side where the sidecar is. Or am I wrong? I think it does. I think it just reduces the G loading and the cornering speed, and it's even more difficult because it's so light on that inside wheel that I don't think you could do anything with short corners on that at all. Anyway, interesting discussion point. Maybe others would disagree with that. It'd be interesting to know. Second one from Lee Kambanga, one of our regulars. Hi, Lee. Hi, Peter. What a great drive from Max. I know you said it was about making the tyres work, but I understand Red Bull introduced a new floor in Mexico, and it was the same in Brazil, sprint and qualifying. Next, what I heard, it's difficult to find a sweet spot with that floor. The changes they made include putting back the Austin floor, so it contributed to the performance. What do you think? Well, I think the basic floor is the one they've had since Monza. And yeah, of course, they've done some upgrades around that. But as far as letting the FIA know about something as substantial as a new floor, which they have to do now, there hasn't been any notification from Red Bull, and we have to rely on that because it's very difficult to see from the outside, even if you're in the pit lane. You know, they've got so many closed garage doors these days. So I think it goes back to Monza, and they've made updates. But I think, as Mark and I were saying, Mark more than I, obviously, Mexico showed in the thin air that they have a very, very acute aero efficiency package that has a big drop off if you're not within the range with the ride height you want and the flow you want. Whereas McLaren have a much softer sweet spot around which they can operate from circuit to circuit. Red Bull's is much more precise, and it didn't work in the thin air of Mexico. And when they got to Brazil, because of the harder range of Pirellis and the ambience and the way the car was originally set up in terms of riding the bumps, it quickly ran into trouble. And because it was a sprint race, there wasn't a lot of time to do much about it. They tried to go really the opposite direction, I would imagine, and give themselves more front-end grip for qualifying, and it didn't work. And inevitably, if you're going to make a change because you're near the back of the grid and you're going to do the power unit thing, that's another subject, as we know, but you're going to do that, you then make more changes. Now, whether it was to things like rebound, whether it was to do with ride height, whether it's to do with trying to get the front to be softer or the rear stiffer or more traction, I've no idea, and it's very difficult to say. But for sure, they made changes. But I don't think there were fundamental changes so far as you're saying with the floor. And I think what we're seeing is Red Bull have done a pretty good job of bringing the RB21 up to speed, but it's nothing like as consistently quick. Now, Mark has sent some notes, and he thinks on his notes, his famous last words, he probably won't enjoy me quoting him on this, but he thinks that the Red Bull actually will probably be quite good in Vegas, I think. I think that's what he said. I don't want to misquote him. Oh no, so here you go. Good low. Should be quick at remaining races, providing they're not bumpy. I think what he's saying is that floor that they're running is very susceptible to bumps. So Vegas ? Depends what the track surface is like, I guess, and nobody really knows until you actually get there. So I think that's where we're at with Red Bull, and I also think. And I'm not sure Mark agrees with me here, but it's just me having been around for so long and talked to so many teams that have no idea where they... sometimes it goes back to, the car's really good on race tyres. You put the qualifiers on and it's terrible. We just couldn't get them to work, or vice versa. And that goes back to the 80s, let alone to today. And this whole black art thing of getting the tyres to work in their window, relating to the car that you have, not necessarily a generic window, is something that's always there, and it's prevalent now because of the Pirelli monopoly and the lack of information the teams get from Pirelli. And as I say, if you want to see why Max was slow on Saturday, look at why Alpine were relatively quick. They don't know any more than Red Bull know. It's the black art of trying to run these tyres and find the right sweet spot to get the temperatures to work. Actually, it was the difference between George and Antonelli as well, to some extent, in some of the sessions. So it's all a black art, Despite all that technology, all the computers, all the data, ghost in the machine, Aldous Huxley, forget it. There's not enough information on tyres. Jez James, hi Peter. TV reporter Chris Searle once co-drove for Roger Clark and said, I drive in snow, I hit trees. Roger drives in snow, he seems to go very neatly down the middle of the road. Major of achievement. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a huge Roger Clark fan. And partly because he's got a great name and had a great name when Jim was around. I think they were pretty good buddies. And he drove so well. I was lucky to see him in that Cossack Escort BDA on the RAC Rally and the Monte Carlo. Just wonderful to watch. You know, I would put him up there with, you know, Ogier, Neuville, Loeb, all those guys. Really, really good. Speaking of which, just completely surprising news that Ott Tanak has just announced his retirement at the end of this season from rallying. And unlike Kalle Rovanperä, he's not saying, and I'm going to come into motor racing. He's saying, I want to go back to Estonia where he lives and be with my family. So my son was reading, going to school, took him to school this when he's reading out the number of shunts Ott's had. I think it's something like 32 big shunts. That's rolling. One of them into the river. Massive shunt last year on Estonia, actually, just before Finland. Yeah, so good to see. A good career, very quick driver. And yeah, he deserves a peace and quiet bit of trout fishing, I think. Salmon fishing and whatever it is they do there. Lee again. I also think Red Bull would have nothing to lose by leaving Max out with the mediums. The worst would have been second. I believe his tyres were around 9 seconds a lap older than Lando's, and Lando didn't have new tyres. Yeah, that's right. But then again, don't forget that last radio message from Max. I don't know whether it went out publicly, but it was, I don't care what the others are doing. I've got no grip. Sort this out. And they did. And their solution was to bring him in. And I think he'd reached the cliff of that set of mediums. And yeah, you can't, in that situation, yeah, you can think, will Lando, what will he do? You know, he hasn't got new tyres, I have. You just have to make sure that the guy's got grip. And I think they made the right call. And yeah, Kimi's tyres were going off right at the end as well, his used mediums. But I think they can be happy with P3. He might have got P2 if he'd stayed out. You just never know. But it was a flip of the coin, and I think it was I would have made that call if I was there. I think, and I'm not saying that because it's me, first person perpendicular. I'm saying we all need to do that. You know, in saying things like that, what would you have done in that situation if you were in the pit wall and you had to make that call right then? I would have brought him in. That's all I can say. That was my gut feeling of the right thing to do, getting on a new set of softs because he's going to be so quick. The track's going to be not too many cars now and light fuel, yeah, go for it. And it worked. I think it worked as well as it could have worked. However, I think what you said should have been the case in the Spanish Grand Prix. What were they thinking there? Bringing him in, losing track position for the wrong set of tyres anyway. They should have just left him out. It would have taken 2 or 3 laps for anybody to get past him. He would have been top 3. Ridiculous. That was the one. That was the worst mistake they made, I think, strategically all year. Noah Simeo. Hi, Peter. Do you think Lewis has a Tiger Woods 2019 Masters-style comeback left in him if he were to refocus his talent and reset? I mean, with full respect, not saying he isn't focused. Yeah, we accept your full respect as well there, Noah. And, of course, the difference between Lewis and Tiger is that so far as Tiger's comeback was concerned, it was whatever club he had in his hand at any given moment. In Lewis's case, if you take the club in hand, it's a Ferrari, and it's not a very good club at the moment. That's the problem. And motor racing is not as simple as golf in that respect, or any other sport in that respect. You're only as good as the car that you actually are starting the race with. And what actually does it mean, comeback? As I was talking to Cameron about on Monday, you know, a comeback for Lewis is being as good as Charles Leclerc everywhere, and maybe slightly ahead of him, maybe 40-50% of the time, out qualifying him 50% of the time. You could say that's Lewis absolutely at his best, because Charles is that good. There's no way he was ever going to come back at Ferrari, even if he was at his 2021 best, and blow Charles Leclerc away. It wasn't going to happen. Leclerc's too good. And that's where I think a lot of Lewis fans got it wrong. So Lewis at his very best should be out qualifying Charles, as I say, 50%, maybe 55% of the time. But Lewis at the moment obviously isn't at his best, and that's why Charles is looking good. So the comeback was always going to be difficult with Lewis if he puts himself alongside Charles in a team like Ferrari. The comeback would have been easier to measure had he gone to, had McLaren got rid of both their drivers and said, right, Lewis, we want you as number one, and we're going to have whoever in the other car, not Oscar or Lando, then you could have seen Lewis probably at his very best as a number one driver leading a team like McLaren, a car that good, probably be winning the World Championship this year. And that for sure is in him still. But if you put him in a Ferrari, which is a below par car, excuse the pun, going back to Tiger Woods, and you've got Charles Leclerc in the other car, that's why he is where he is. Sarosh Soman, yeah, sorry, I just had to get that right. Peter, some points from my side. During the sprint race, we had Piastri, Colapinto spinning when they hit the white line coming out of turn 2. Max and Leclerc also hit it. What I could see was both Max and Leclerc reacted as if they were part of the car. It was just instantaneous, where Oscar, just lost the thing there, sorry. I'll read it off here. Where Oscar, no, I can read it here. So, where Oscar and reacted after the car was already in the momentum of spinning. I thought it was a good way to understand the feel. Yeah, I'd take Oscar out of that though, because his spin was the first, and it was because he hit the curb, had water in it, and he hit that curb, and the water splashed out. Obviously, he then spun, but everybody else spun on that water, and then you saw how everybody reacted to going over that water. That's what I think happened, and so Colapinto, yeah, no surprise there, and Max and Leclerc getting through it again, no surprise, because the way they drive, it's not that they're driving with margin. Lando Norris, please note, it's that the sweet spot they create at the rotation point or just before the rotation point allows them magically to deal with variables that come into play in a millisecond. That's what we saw. Very, very good. Yeah. Max 790 says, hi Peter, Brazil showed us how different Max drives. When he was behind Lewis, he was turning in so much earlier. Was this because he had more grip? Lewis did not look like a short corner driver. No, that's what I've been saying since 2022. Lewis is not a short corner driver now. Sorry, I haven't been saying that since, I've been saying that since Barcelona 2022, because I was a bit shell-shocked initially when I saw the way he was having to drive that 2022 Merc. I think if it was Lewis 21 with Max 25 Brazil, they would have looked pretty similar. But Lewis has completely gone, he's gone the Lando Norris route of creating more margin because he's so unsure about either the front end or the rear end of any racing car he's driving, whether it's a Mercedes or a Ferrari. Very sad to see because he's got so much talent. But yeah, he's leaving a massive margin now. He's leaving the sort of Lando Norris margin that he was describing, because you want to be able to see the corner and just not do anything until you know you're there, sort of thing. Whereas Max is, boom, he just knows his rotation point in his head before he's even got there. It's the Carlos Reutemann thing, seeing the exit of the corner before you've even turned in. That's what Max is doing. So yeah, that's why Max was driving at his absolute best. He suddenly had a race car where he could feel the 4 tyres on the road, the medium tyre, new set of medium in both stints, and he was driving as Max drives. I'd be interested to know what Lewis thought of that. He probably didn't really look at it, and he probably thinks it's completely irrelevant because the Ferrari was so difficult. And don't forget also, was this in the? Don't forget Lewis had a lot of problems with the floor at that point. He was all over the place, wasn't he? So because of the shunt in the first corner, which I said in my video was not really Lewis's fault. I have to confess, I haven't really looked at it that closely, but I just assumed that was the case because there were no penalties or whatever. But a lot of people said, no, Lewis should have avoided that. So anyway, I just repeat what other people are saying now. It's probably not a very responsible thing to do. But a lot of people seem to be saying that. And of course, the other point is, if you want to avoid all those first corner shunts, you don't qualify where Lewis did. Because if in Brazil, you qualify back of the midfield or in the midfield, and that's first corner shunt territory, isn't it? Hurricane OK1. Hi, Peter. You've spoken before about Lawson's ability to load up his tyres, but would you have believed he would be able to do 52 laps on mediums while defending his position like that? Well, looking at the data now, it's pretty clear that Hadjar was quicker, but he made a bit of a mess of an overtake, and then I think he might have damaged the car a bit and then finished behind Liam. But full credit to Liam. what I've always said about Liam, he does have this ability, sort of Rubens Barrichello-like ability to get into a rhythm. Lando Norris, to some extent, get into a rhythm and just be very, very repeatable in everything he's doing. And quite often, I mean, Rubens was a wide entry oversteery driver as well. And quite often those sorts of drivers, Carlos Sainz is another, do get into rhythms quite comfortably, because there's a sort of motion to their body language and the way they're using the car that enables them to repeat that. The problem is if things suddenly go wrong, or there's a crosswind or whatever, as I've explained before. And the other key to Liam's drive was that car was very good on those tyres at that point, with that ambient, with that track temperature, and he really did well with it. I think Hadjar would have done just as well had he done it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Liam is harder on tyres than Isaac Hadjar, for sure. On any given lap, Isaac will use the tyres less because he's spreading the load between the 4 tyres much more equitably than Liam does. That's not to say that Liam is so aggressive that he blisters the rear all the time and gets graining after 4 laps. It's not to say any of that. It's to say that he does load up the tyres. And that was another thing that could have accounted for it. On a day when getting the tyres right, maybe Liam's ability to load up the tyre, the rear particularly, as he was doing it, was a nice counterbalance to anything going on with the front. And he was energizing the tyres in a way that wouldn't work on some other circuits when the Pirelli range is softer and the ambients are higher. So it kind of worked for him there, and good luck. He did a very good job, very good concentration. I just love to see him, develop his style a bit and start shortening his corners and learning from Isaac Hadjar. That's what should be happening. But I imagine that's the last thing in his mind, and he's probably thinking, I've got to beat Hadjar, and I'm better than Hadjar, and I've got nothing to learn from Hadjar. It's probably the way he's thinking. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I guess that's the way he's thinking. Mario Mosco says, hi Peter, in your video of the Brazil Grand Prix, you mentioned the exact gears the drivers were using when the safety car ended. Where do you get that information, and is it accessible to everybody? I have to say, I have no idea whether it's accessible to everybody or not. I'm quite privileged in the data that I get, and I try to let sleeping dogs lie and just get on with it and ask too many questions about who else has got this or why I've got it. And so I don't know, to be honest, about that. But yeah, the information I have, I can see at any given moment what gear they're in, what revs they've got, and what their steering, what their throttle and brake input is at that moment. The only thing I don't have access to is steering or GPS. Well, I have the track map thing, but not accurate GPS. So, yeah, but anyway, yeah. And to me that, I can't imagine the TV commentators of all the networks that pay millions to be broadcasting Formula One don't have access to the same info, and why I assume everybody could see that Antonelli was in third and would have been calling that as they were about to restart the race, wouldn't they? Wouldn't they be saying, but look, Antonelli's in third, what's going to happen here? Potentially there could be a drama because everybody around him's in second. They're going to be much more accelerative coming up the hill, going down the pit straight. What is Antonelli doing? Maybe he's got a game plan here. Let's see what happens. Lando's slowing. No, they're going, no, look, Antonelli. That's how I would have called it. That's what, because it was all there, all that info was there. And I assume that's what they did or not. Probably much better than I just did then, for sure, knowing some of them. Dillstar22, hi, Peter. Ahmedul here, hi there. Do you think Robert Kubica could have had a better career had he moved to Ferrari in 2011? Would be interested in your thoughts. Did he have an option to do that? If he did, yeah, he should have. I can't remember now, I have to say. It says before accident, right? When did he have his accident? Of course. I'd love to have seen Robert in anything really quick, and he was going to have a very good year, no question, at Lotus when he broke that, when we had the accident. But I wasn't aware that he actually had a Ferrari Formula One offer, did he? Let me just check that. I just want to check when he had the accident, actually. Someone will tell me. What's happened? He had the accident in... looks like end of 2010, so for 11. Well, Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense because he was going to drive the Lotus in 2011, wasn't he? So you think he might have had a Ferrari offer for that year? Why would that be? I didn't know about that. Not sure that's right. But anyway, we'll see what happens. See if it was the case, as I say, I think in a Ferrari, in a race-winning car, he could have been a world champion. I think he was that good, Robert. I really do. Really rate him. Still do. Lovely guy and very, very quick. Sarosh again. Hi, Pete. I thought Leclerc's qualifying lap was mega. The car was turning in sharply. Felt like he went for a low downforce setup that had no rear end. Interestingly, Hamilton was saying that his car was unstable at the rear and couldn't drive it in qualifying. Is it because Leclerc and Ham went for a similar setup? Let me just... I don't know if I've got them to hand. Let me have a look and see what the top speeds were in qualifying between Leclerc and Hamilton. My memory is that Hamilton was a little bit quicker on the straight, which might explain why he was more unstable at the rear. No, I can't. It's not here. I didn't do it then. I think in general, there's no doubt about it, Leclerc is far more able to deal with an unstable rear than Lewis Hamilton at this stage of Lewis's career. That's the last thing Lewis wants. It's taken this long to get there. Jenson Button was like that throughout his career, at least. So at least Lewis lived with an unstable rear for a long time. Not that he had it very much at McLaren and Mercedes, but he could have lived with it, I guess, if it was the way to get the front to work. But here at Ferrari, I don't think he enjoys unstable rears at all. Whereas Leclerc can live with it and massage it if he's got a good front end, which is what he did get finally in qualifying. So yeah, that's always going to be the difference. That's why I say, to expect a comeback from Lewis now on the basis of beating Charles Leclerc, it's a big ask, a very big ask. Max 790, Häkkinen compared his style to Schumacher recently and said he was at least as quick on fast corners, but Michael better in slow. However, he said he always had a higher minimum speed than Schumacher. Yeah, and I think that's absolutely, let me just structure that one. It's not, I need to give a bit more space to the question. There we go. That's absolutely makes sense, doesn't it? And I think I was asked this question before about Mika, and I said, he was very, very good on fast corners, but not as great dealing with understeer on slow corners. It was the thing that he liked least, understeer, and he didn't have as many tools as Michael to deal with that, or Lewis or Max or Charles have today. And so that's where Michael was good. But no surprise, and one of the reasons he wasn't able to deal with the understeer is that his minimum speed was quite high, because Michael, being a Max type driver, was only interested in the early entry to the corner and extending the straight and trading off the lateral load against braking, totally disinterested in his minimum speed mid-corner, and then focusing only on extending the straight out of the corner. And so no wonder that Mika, when he had a good front end, he would drive a slow corner the way he drove a fast corner, which was basically get the power on as soon as he could, brake late and get the power on, which he did incredibly well. But it didn't work on slow corners when he had understeer. That's where he went wrong. But that's why he always had quite high minimum speeds compared with Michael. And it's not something he should be, in the way he's saying it there. It's like, well, but I had high minimum speed, so at least I beat him there. And it's like that's why he beat you, Mika, because you had higher minimum speeds. Higher minimum speeds are not always a good thing, as I think is now pretty clear. Quentin Hirschfeld, hi Mr. Windsor, wanted to know what was the pair of drivers you had in mind for USF1 that unfortunately never saw the day of light? Yeah, good question. Our driver in the race shop when we were doing the seat design and seat fitting was John Watson, who was really good, very, very good. That was just, having a good Formula One driver know his way around a cockpit and know how we should do the whole interior of the car. That was great. And the two drivers we were going to run was Gilles de Ferran and Kenny Brack. And I still think both of them, forget about my attempt to do a Formula One team at that point, I still think both of them, had they been given the chance, could have been very, very good Formula One drivers. As we know, they went on to win the Indy 500 and excel in America. But when I was talking to both of them, it was right at the beginning of they were sort of just out of Formula 3, getting into Formula 2 point. And I just felt both of them really talented and would do a great job. So that's what it would have been. De Ferran Brack. Good combination, I think. Same questioner, Quentin again. Another question. Don't you think Verstappen's car control perhaps even better than drivers who base their style on reflexes? He also got a massive oversteer on turn 3 in the sprint, but as usually, he held it as he does. Well, yeah, I mean, I've never said Max doesn't have great car control. I just say we don't get to see it very often because he's usually manipulating the car in such a way that he doesn't need to rely on sheer car control and reflexes and all that other stuff. He just does it all on balance and feel and touch. But yeah, we definitely, whenever we see it with Max, it's incredible. Like that opening flying lap in Barcelona when he was on was it the medium or the hard, whatever he was on. Anyway, they were not up to temperature, and he comes out of that last corner and the thing goes like that. And most drivers would have a problem then getting it back the other way, and he just got it absolutely perfectly back on line. Yeah, no, his car control is beyond belief, really. He's the best on the grid, I would say. But we just don't see it very often because he doesn't put himself in positions where he has to use it. That's the point. He doesn't drive on reflexes. He drives on anticipation and feel. And it's wonderful to see. Maybe it's boring for some people because they love to see a driver sideways. And then the great words of Gilles Villeneuve, it's such a shame that going sideways isn't quick because, we all love it. But that's why I personally love rallying or watching rallying, because that's when you do see some car control you can touch and feel. And I've mentioned it before, but if you're just catching up, there is a YouTube channel out there called Rust Bucket Motorsport. And if you need your fix of car control, go and subscribe to Rust Bucket. This guy is unbelievable. Of course, there are other people as good, if not better. But the way he does it, he's completely anonymous. He doesn't want anyone to know who he is, where he lives, what he's from, what his name is, for logical reasons you'll understand when you get to the YouTube channel. But he always gets these, dogs of cars. And his latest one is some sort of automatic Chevrolet pickup truck. And he puts that automatic Chevrolet pickup truck through more gyrations and more angles than the entire population of Chevrolet pickup trucks would ever have experienced throughout their entire life in the United States. I mean, he's just sideways everywhere in it. Just amazing. And that's just one example, but he does it in lots of old cars. It's called Rust Bucket because he's a failed rally driver, never got the money together actually to do a full championship. But I hope he's doing really well now with the YouTube channel. And he buys all these old cars and does them up, rust buckets basically, and thrashes them. VW Passats, just absolutely sideways everywhere. Unbelievable car control. Rust Bucket Motorsport. Go and have a look. It's so funny. Muzangani. Hi, Peter. Do you think today's drivers are mentally more overloaded due to hybrid systems, strategy calls, radio traffic, or were the challenges of the 80s, 90s, manual gearboxes, turbo lag, just as bad? Well, if you look at Kimi starting that restart in third gear, maybe they are. What can I say? He's a rookie, isn't he? So I'd be interested to know if that was deliberate or whether that was a mistake or whether he was just completely overloaded mentally or what. But that's if it was the latter, it's a good example of how drivers are overloaded, and you can only learn so much on a hybrid. Actually, it's good use hybrid sim, because sims are great, but the environment is relatively controlled. It's not a high pressure restart environment in the Brazilian Grand Prix when you're lying second. It's a different thing. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and there was a lot going on even 10 years ago. I think I've told you the story once, but I'll repeat it, of Jensen in his BAR Honda days. But this is prior to 2009. This is when, the car wasn't the best car in Formula One. He was, and I think it was Hungary, but he was something like third row or something like that. And when the cars pulled away for the formation lap, he stayed still, didn't move, and then eventually started away. And when I was asking one of my mates within the team a few weeks later, which you don't ask straight away what happened. I said, what happened there? And he said, Jensen just said he got a complete mental blackout and just couldn't remember the starting sequence that he had to go through, and we had to talk him through it, and then it all went perfectly, and oh yeah, I'm dum sort of thing. So even then overload was a deal, but yeah, back in the old days there was much less going on, and you I guess as a driver you were more sensitive to noise and vibration and all that stuff, and dog rings and brakes, and you had to make your own decisions of how to massage the car, and very rarely did a car finish a Grand Prix in perfect health. You're always having to look after something, so it was just part of the game really. I've lost third gear, I'm going to have to go from second to fourth now, and fourth back to second. And that was pretty normal, really, for a lot of the teams, a lot of the drivers. And they got used to doing that. They became quite mechanically sympathetic. And today, there are so many fixes. And you have quite a lot of irascibility, don't you, between the driver and the engineers of wanting to fix a problem, and the engineers are focusing on another problem, and the downshifting isn't right, and they're worrying about the front tire temperatures. And they've got so much information that it's quite difficult for the drivers somewhat. That's why sometimes you hear the engineers saying, look, just turn off the radio or whatever, stop talking and focus on the driving, because there's too much overload. That's what is going on. So is it too much? I don't know, really. It's a good question, isn't it? I suppose, if it turns out that a guy like Kimi, as good as Kimi, can make a mistake like that, then we need all to think that maybe there is a bit too much information overload for young drivers into Formula One. Equally, maybe a one-off. Equally, it may have been deliberate. So we just don't know. I'll try and find out eventually. MM Global. Hi, Peter. Hope all is well. Third time's a charm. I've wanted to ask, what exponential growth points in Formula One have you witnessed in its growth spurt? And if you were surprised or expected this would occur? Well, it depends what you mean by growth spurt. Obviously, that's quite subjective. If you mean the number of races in which we now have in a calendar, 24 against the old standard of 18 or whatever, then am I surprised? No, not at all, because a lot of the groundwork for that was laid by Bernie, and the design of the TV broadcast center with Eddie Baker, which was transportable to every country of the world. And there were two of them, so they could leapfrog one another and set up in advance. No other sport industry in the world was even thinking that way. And therefore, the minute Bernie had that sorted, it basically then opened the doors to a truly global sport, entertainment sport, that could go to any part of the world and perform and look exactly as it did, as it always does, in terms of the paddock, the pit lane, the tracks, the advertising, the value for money for sponsors. So the minute Bernie created that, then Formula One was always going to be growing massively. And I suppose, I never really thought about it that much because he kind of took it for granted, but I suppose I thought in the era when money was falling out of the sky from tobacco industry companies that eventually that would stop, and somehow there would be a quantum shift in the way Formula One generated its money. I suppose, like everybody else, I never imagined that pay-per-view television would be able to produce the sort of money that they do, and that streaming, deals would be as big as they are, to the point where the teams are more focused on therefore delivering on the number of races in a season than they are on how much sponsorship they're going to get on the car. Most of the money, not most, but a big majority of the money now comes from what you might call prize money or starting money, whatever you want to call it, the big cake that Formula One has from appearing in 24 different countries or 24 different races. Whereas the sponsorship side has kind of fallen away, and it's nothing like as, it's difficult to say, because most today a tobacco company, a cigarette company has a terrible feel to it in terms of what we now know about smoking. But they've been replaced by, in many ways, by betting and crypto, haven't they? If you want, crypto is the dark side of the money world, isn't it? And yet Formula One is embracing it, and there it is, and betting the same. So it's a little bit cheesier, I think, in that sponsorship area. There are obviously some blue chip companies, but generally the whole Formula One team sponsor thing has fallen away. Would I have predicted that? Not really, no. I think I would have been guilty of thinking the teams are probably still going to be the biggest earners and that the TV money would have been less. I never imagined it would be TV money here and team money down there. So, yeah, that's the main thing. And I think that's what I mean by growth. I don't know how to quantify it any other way, really. Hope that kind of answers the question. Muzamguni says, you praised Max's precision, but drivers like Senna or Mansell had to sense grip without today's data. Does that deeper feel for the car make their craft harder to compare or more impressive? Now, I don't think any of Max's feel or speed or touch comes from data. It comes from feel and touch. He's feeling the surface of the road. The engineer's not saying, oh yeah, the temperatures are right now, turn in now, Max, brake now, come out of the brake pedal. No, it's all completely natural in the same way it was for Nigel Mansell or Ayrton Senna or Michael Schumacher or Lewis Hamilton at his best, or is with Charles Leclerc. It's all completely natural. The data is on the preparation lap, where he is with tyre temperatures, what settings to run with the diff in terms of traction and other things he can adjust from the cockpit from information they're giving, but they're not telling him how to drive. And if they were, why isn't Yuki Tsunoda doing a better job? They all need to have one of these Rob Wilson vests that Rob's been developing with backers, and Porsche are adopting for a lot of their drivers they're training now, where you have a vest with sensors on it, and if you're turning in at the wrong rate through the steering, or the brake pedal pressure's being released too suddenly, you feel a vibration or a light comes on the dash. And Rob could program in a Max lap, a Fernando Alonso lap, and a Carlos Sainz lap. And if you drive it accordingly to the vibrations or the lights, you could experience those 3 different laps. That's what. And as I've said before, don't forget with Max, it's not a question of line. It's a question of his touch and feel, and he could actually reproduce his lap times using different lines. That's why quite often you see him on a constant radius going through some corners. Hairpin at Suzuka, good example. And there was one in Mexico. No, let me think. Not Mexico. There was one in Austin the hairpin in Austin. Yeah, same thing. He wasn't using the traditional geometric apex in Austin at all. And that wasn't therefore, in terms of a line through the geometrical apex, it was a completely different line, but he was still super quick. So it's all about massaging the car, feeling the grip, and maximizing the grip at any given moment. Tiger says, what a race. Totally agree. It could have been unbelievably boring. The only thing that would have made it better would have been if it rained over the last 5 laps. How would that have been, eh? Ben says, the goatest of all goats. Yeah, I think you're referring to Max Verstappen there. Max outdid himself again, from Tiger. Rao 5160, did you think Carlos Reutemann enjoyed wheel-to-wheel racing? Also, did he race in Macau? What was his thoughts on Ferrari? He enjoyed wheel-to-wheel racing, providing it was racing, but he was in the era when he was quite often he was in a 3-litre Cosworth DFV producing, 440, 450 horsepower, racing against Renault turbos and turbo Ferraris producing 600 horsepower. So, if you think about, 81 Spanish Grand Prix, good example, Jerez, he's stuck behind, who was it, René Arnoux? Oh, Gilles, obviously holding everybody up, and then a couple of other turbo cars, and you just sit there. There's nothing you can do. French Grand Prix, the same. It's mega quick through all the corners, and then René Arnoux just blasts away from you on the straight. It's not really motor racing. Wheel to wheel, Niki Lauda pass Brands Hatch 78 British Grand Prix, pretty good. I think he was fine. He just liked everything to be relatively fair and relatively equal. That was Carlos's thing. Didn't race at Macau. Did a lot of rallying in his career. Raced on a lot of dodgy circuits in Argentina before he came to Europe, in quick cars like Porsche 917s and Lola T70 Mark III Bs and all sorts of things. And then thoughts on Ferrari. He loved Ferrari. He got on very well with Luca Montezemolo, very well with Alessandro de Tommaso, who was close to Ferrari, had that lovely hotel in Modena, the Canal Grande. So he was very much a part of all that. And he loved, I remember him saying once, one of the most pleasurable things he ever did in his racing career was driving the 1973 312P Ferrari at Le Mans, I think with Tim Schenken. He said just listening to that flat 12 engine flat out on the straight for sort of a minute and a half was just like pure magic. 3 a.m. in a dark night. And he always said about Ferrari, very good gearboxes, very good brakes. Shame about the chassis. That was. I don't think that applied to the 312P, but it certainly applied to the 312 T2 he drove for the first time in '76. He couldn't believe how bad that car was, and he was coming from a Brabham Alpha. Don't forget, '77 on good years it was terrible, but when they got onto Michelin's, and then obviously the T3, Foglieri T3 on Michelin's, it was a great car, and he loved that car. He loved Michelin tires as well. He loved the radials. He loved to be able to crush the sidewall with the radial and get a spring effect mid-corner. I dare say Max would as well. So yeah, there you go, Ferrari. Ben, the one and only. Tiger says Piastri, hard luck, clear racing incident. Well, yeah, kind of. I think Antonelli was lucky not to get the penalty there. So in that sense, it wasn't a racing incident. It was a racing. I think Antonelli set up the collision. To be honest, he set up the collision, so it wasn't just a clear racing incident. There's no way Piastri should have got a penalty, but it all happened because of that terrible restart by Antonelli. David L. Gamma, hi Peter from Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey there, nice to have you. Hope you're well. I'm greatly saddened for my hero Sir Lewis. I'm interested in your thoughts. Well, don't be. I mean, he took this decision of his own volition, didn't he? Which was massive money, red overalls, well, sometimes red. Ferrari, the name of Ferrari, the prancing horse, the pasta, great country, great musicians, great film industry, everything he loves about life kind of summed up by Italy, I think. I mean, I know he loves the States as well, but I think he loves everything about Italy, and no surprise, really. It's a great country, isn't it, in that sense? Shaped like a boot, too. What more could you want? So he took that decision, and he wasn't very happy where he was anyway, because George was super quick, and the car was sometimes okay, but not very good anymore. So where was the downside? Back end of his career, always wanted to drive for Ferrari. And if people just accepted it as that, I think we'd all think, wow, it's brilliant to see Lewis in a Ferrari. Wow, look, he's only a 10th slower than Charles today, or whatever, or a 10th quicker. Or he's beaten Charles today on the road, and just accepted it for what it was, that's fine. But if you put your expectations higher of a 7 times world champion who's decided to make the break from Mercedes to go to Ferrari to win an 8th championship, the only team that can take him there, and Lewis has the talent, then you're always going to be disappointed, because that was never going to happen. That was never going to be the basis of his switch to Ferrari. And it's a bit like Michael Andretti coming to Europe in Formula One and alongside Ayrton Senna, and all the American press being very disappointed because he got blown away by Ayrton. Well, what do they expect? And Lewis, at this stage of his career, I don't think you can expect anything more than he's delivering right now. And as I said at the start of this show, I don't think John Elkann is helping at all, because A, they don't have Adrian Newey, which potentially they could have got if they'd really, really battled for it and got everything that Adrian wanted. Adrian Newey could be in that team now, and you would be sending me a message saying, wow, do you think Lewis can win the World Championship in 2026? And I'd be saying, well, he's got to beat Charles, but he's got a very good chance. Instead of which we're saying, well, we just don't know how bad or good the Ferrari's going to be next year, and chances are it's not going to be brilliant because they're not very good now. And then you got John Elkann saying the drivers need to talk less, whatever that means. And, it's a mess. They've got the priorities incorrect, in my opinion. You can't blame Lewis for accepting an offer to go to Ferrari, but it was actually the wrong offer, because Ferrari didn't need Lewis Hamilton. They needed Adrian Newey. They needed to keep Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and they'd be better off if they had Adrian with that driver combination, in my opinion. So everything was wrong, but you can't blame Lewis for accepting an offer and doing what he's doing. But if you're going to accept the offer, enjoy Ferrari for what it is and for this stage of his career and how it's going to go. Mike is echoing. It's never perfect, is it? I think everybody needs to remember, where was it? I was watching something recently. I think it was Formula One. I think it was Carlos Sainz in, where was it? Maybe even Mexico. And he was doing an interview after qualifying and nobody could hear a word, completely silent. And everybody giving me a hard time about sound. Go and listen to F1 TV in that case. Hi, Peter, says Alwyn Kruger. Hi there. Greetings, one and all from Arizona. Hi there. Dustin Hudson, loud and clear, Mr. Windsor. Thank you. And then the Warm, who gave me that hard time, says, I had 2 tabs open, lots of laughs. Oh, well. Now I've turned down the volume. Everyone will probably say it's too quiet now. Can't win. Anyway, I'm doing my best. As I say, I'm on Jack's MacBook Air at the moment, so you need to make allowances for that. It's not, I don't think it's the worst one, the worst computer you can have, but it's certainly not absolutely top of the range. It's the M3 chip, which is pretty good, very good. But I'm going to get a new one with the M4 Pro, I think it is. Leonardo Puppets. Hi, Peter. Which driver has had the worst luck this year, Charles or Alonso? Have a nice day. Well, that's a good question. I'm not very good at apportioning or understanding luck even. For me, luck is something that there's always a cause and a reason behind everything that happens on this in this universe. So you always have to look back at the basis of anything that's happening and where it's come from. Is Charles unlucky? Has he been unlucky? He's qualified in areas sometimes where he's prone to incidents from other drivers. He's lost some races because things haven't gone right with strategy calls, but that's not luck. That's just bad strategy calls. For me, Charles actually, if you look at it in one way, he's had a pretty good year so far because Lewis Hamilton's joined his team, Ferrari team, and he's actually kind of had no problem with Lewis. There have been occasions when Lewis has done a better job. Sprint race China, good example. But in general, Charles Leclerc, the guy's never won a world championship, looks pretty strong alongside a 7 times world champion. So you'd have to say Charles, given that the Ferrari car has been hopeless, has done a pretty good job this year. Alonso, how has Alonso been unlucky? I think he's incredibly lucky because in the course of his year where he's blowing away Lance Stroll in a way that Sebastian Vettel never really blew Lance Stroll away, Adrian Newey has been enticed to join the team, and all of a sudden he's in a team where Adrian is building the car for the following season. He's going to keep his drive, and he's driving very well, still driving as well as ever, and blowing Lance away. So I would say he's unbelievably lucky in a way to be in that position now. He's worked hard for it, and he's had some terrible years, and he's kept going, and he's got the resilience, he's got the grittiness. Let's hope that, like Nigel in 92, he gets the reward he deserves and blitzes everything from his point of view and wins the World Championship in an Adrian Newey Aston Martin with a Andy Cowell Honda engine. Could easily happen. So I don't think he's been unlucky this year. I think in a way it's kind of good that he's not in the best car because it's taken away any sort of political drama that he might have had with Charles, with Lance Stroll. And he's been able to keep that whole thing very harmonious, which is unusual for Fernando because he usually blows everything apart. But he's done a very good job, obviously, with the father of Lance Stroll, the owner of the team and the provider of all the money. So he's in with him. That's the most important thing. He's kept that. B, he's got Adrian now to look forward to working with. Brilliant. There you go. Quite sure what this means. They found an engine in the catering department. Probably talking about Red Bull and the power unit. Yeah, okay. Hurricane OK says, if they had the power unit on hand, obviously they either had already paid for it or would eventually pay for it. Yeah, I mean, you budget for things like that, I guess. And it's just that this grey area, which the chat box has just suddenly stopped. I'll try and reopen it. You have this grey area between performance and reliability that I was talking about with earlier, and it's a difficult one because the teams have so much information on the performance of the power unit that they can predict kind of what area is going to go first, and they can preempt that. But is that really a power unit change because of reliability stroke unreliability? That's the question. Probably not. Okay, I think I know what's going on. I don't know if we've lost anything there, but I think I know what's going on here. Let me just try a different Wi-Fi. Another problem, I'm not going to do it actually because nothing looks any better. Nothing, well, that one looks quite good. Different Wi-Fi, no, can't do it. So we'll stick with where we're at. One of the problems is I can't do a hardwire connection for this because my camera and my audio do not work if you put in a USB-C extension. So they have to go into the actual USB-C connections in the computer, which uses up the 2 on a MacBook Air and doesn't leave me in a third slot for my hardwire. And an audio and picture, I think, is more important than internet. Well, kind of. Maybe not, actually. Good question. Anyway, I'm going to try and go back now here and get the chat box going again. So just bear with me. Not the easiest of things to do while you're running, but I think it's working okay. I'm going to put that into the browser now. It's interesting, all this stuff, isn't it? As I said, a few live streams ago, that it's kind of cool that we all have access to what is basically a new TV, your own TV channel, but you've really got to be on top of it to run it well. I've got some super chats here. Let's see if that comes up. Yes, this is from Mac790. Thank you very much indeed, Mac. Sainz said he's not surprised Leclerc is so dominant over Lewis. He said he hopes people now appreciate what a good job he was doing at Ferrari. Well, of course, what he says is 100% true, and it's what I've been saying all year. And I'm glad, well, I'm not glad, I mean, Carlos himself shouldn't be saying that, but we should all be saying that about Carlos, and we should have been from the start of the year. And obviously, every time Charles beats Lewis, it looks good for Carlos because Carlos had his fair share of races where he was quicker than Leclerc and won races against him. So yeah, no, that's no surprise, and he's right. This is another super chat from Georgie. Peter, in contrast to your various issues with the sport, what do you truly love about it? Why have you remained a follower of it for so long? Oh, well, my various issues with the sport. I've always had issues with the sport going back to 1972. So that's when I first started going to races. What do I love about it? Well, I've been very lucky throughout that time always to be doing something different every year within the realms of Formula One, and therefore seeing Formula One from different angles. And that's what's kept me fascinated. Ultimately, it's always about the driving and looking at how new young drivers perform and how they create corners. And it's about people. That's what I love about Formula One the most, the driving and the people. The cars next, and then the technology behind the cars. Not a distant fourth, but fourth, I would say, in my opinion, are the most interesting thing. So the driving is the most important thing, and I love that. I've always loved that. And then I suppose there's an intangible thing as well, which, as I've explained about other live streams, quite difficult to reproduce over time, and that is that initial thrill of seeing a Lotus, a Jim Clark Lotus, sitting on the grass under an awning with white picket fence in the background, and Jim Clark playing around with his helmet, no shirt on, knowing that practice is going to begin in half an hour, and you can hear some engines running, and there's a smell of high-octane fuel in the air. That moment as well is something I've always loved. Doesn't actually get repeated very often, even if you transpose, to the modern stars and cars. So it's a good question, but thank you for asking that. It's always been about the driving, and I've always been privileged to look at it from different ways. When I first came to Formula One, I was a young, starry-eyed journalist, and I was in awe of everybody. And then I got to know some of these people very well, and they became very close friends, like Frank Williams, like Carlos Reutemann, good example, like Pete McKenzie, brilliant mechanic at Brabham, Dave White, another great mechanic I used to know very well. All these guys, and many more, Joe Ramirez, all very good friends. And when you have friends, then you have a different perspective on everything that's happening. And then during the Carlos period, that's when I first met Nigel, and we became very good friends as well. And then I became very focused on his career and other drivers as well, like Raul Boesel, Stefan Johansson, Kenny Brack, 3 others that I was pretty close to in that period. And then I was focused very much on trying to do my own thing and sort of practice what I preached, if you like, and learning from Frank, learning from Williams, everything I was doing, trying to do my own things. Then I went into television. Then I kept up the writing. Then I've done other stuff. Now I'm doing some movie projects and other stuff and YouTube, which I love. And so it goes on. Everything's different every day. Here I am going to a MacBook Pro M4 Pro. That's a big thing as well, isn't it? Just getting a head around that one. Okay, so there we go. Thanks for that. There's another super chat for the GOAT. Well, I presume you mean Max Verstappen there. Yeah, but anyway, thank you very much indeed for that one. There's only one GOAT out there at the moment, that's Max. Right, I think it's gone up as far as I can on the chat, so if I've missed you, apologies, but it was because we had an internet drama then and we lost the chat, but we're now back into square one, and this is the first one that comes up, which is BL4XXUN. There's probably a way to pronounce that, but I'll leave that to you. I wonder why when Max does an aggressive move that is okay according to the rules, it's called genius. When Kimi does it, people call for the rules to be changed. Quite sure what you mean there. I think Max has had his fair share of penalties, has he not, in traffic? Spanish Grand Prix, good example. And Kimi, I'm not talking about the first corner. I'm talking about what Kimi did at the restart. And that's something that needs to be looked at. I'm not saying the rules, well, I don't know. The rules need to be rewritten, I think, in terms of what happens in a restart behind a safety car, not a virtual safety car, a safety car. Because if you create that sort of speed differential havoc, the first corner is always going to be a mess. And really, I suppose the rule is, if you've created that sort of havoc, you must then avoid trouble at the first corner and let everybody else get on with it. That's what basically should happen. And if you don't do that and you still try to fight aggressively, then you should get a penalty. I think that's what should happen with that, what we learnt from Brazil. Arian Pamela. Hi, Peter. What does Norris need to do to put the nail in the coffin for his rivals' title chances? Well, continue to do what he's doing is an obvious answer. Not worry about the other side of the garage, not that he is anymore anyway, and just take one, it's the cliche. In golf, it's one step at a time. In Formula One, it's one lap at a time almost. Certainly, Friday will lead to Saturday, will lead to Sunday. Just focused on the immediate. Don't let it get ahead of you. Don't think about what it would be like to win the championship. Don't think about parties, celebrations afterwards. Think only of the job at hand in front of you and enjoy driving the car. That's what I would say to him, and I'm sure he is. Cabrito has a response for John Elkann. He says, John Elkann should talk less and sell the team. Well, there you go. Yeah, sell the team to, I don't know, Christian Horner. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Rob 2. When Max was a rookie, people also called for rules to be changed, and rules actually did change due to his behaviour. Well, a little bit. Also, Michael, rules, the whole cannot move under braking rule came from Michael Schumacher, moving under braking. So a lot of the great drivers who have trodden new paths and been very innovative in the way they use their car, to be kind, are responsible in some ways for some of the rules we have. It's not really their fault though. You've got to say, it's the rule makers, isn't it? And the FIA and the whole business of people who love to have rules and penalties, and every time something goes wrong, they jump on it. I bet they don't jump on the Antonelli thing though. That's the point, because nobody was focused on that. They all seem to be watching that first corner, which was wrong. They should have been looking at the run up to the first corner. But Max, Max pushed the envelope definitely, but he never did anything like Romain Grosjean at Monaco. He's never brake tested anybody, to my knowledge or memory. I don't think he has. And Max has been guilty of closing the door on people, going down the inside when perhaps he shouldn't. But that's kind of what racers do, is it not? Do we want to stop all that together? Dustin Hudson says, Elkann, spoilt child, Stellantis, fail, Ferrari, fail on him. Well, yeah. I mean, we don't want to get too abusive because I'm sure he's got some wonderful qualities and he's very, very bright Wall Street banker, or whatever he is, investment broker or owner of companies. But does he know a lot about motor racing? I don't know. Maybe he does. You know, if we said to him tomorrow, do you think it was a mistake for Ascari to go to Lancia when he did? Do you think he'd be able to give a really good answer to that? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. In the post-race interview, Lando said that McLaren didn't have the fastest car in Brazil. What are your thoughts on him never appreciating his car? And 23 Max always praised his car. Well, I think it's ridiculous. And I think that is, I mean, in some ways, you can kind of understand a racing driver always wanting to egg on his technical department and say, come on, I need more, I need more. But there are better ways of doing it than saying, when you've just won the sprint and the feature from the polls, saying, I didn't have the best car in Brazil. I mean, that's a bit fatuous. It's so fatuous that the tech department will say, yeah, okay, go and have a sandwich or something. I mean, there's a more subtle way of saying what he's trying to do, I think, which is just keep the pressure up on everyone. Because, of course, they did have the best car in Brazil. Absolutely. And, you know, there's no doubt about that. What would he think was the best car? The car that Max couldn't get out of Q1, or the Ferraris that Charles Leclerc on his absolute best could only get into P3? What else is he thinking of? I don't know. No idea. I think he's just trying to put pressure on the team, as I say, and keep the pressure up. That's a poor way of saying it. Okay, I think there's a bit of a chat amongst yourself about Max now. And Gabrito says, Max had the fastest car in Brazil, no doubt. Absolutely correct. Danger Z2000, gutted for Oscar. Kimi is a rookie. He will learn. He's so young. The real problem is the cars are so big. It's amazing they fit side by side at all. Yeah, I think what you're saying there is you're talking about the first corner incident again and saying, you know, Kimi shouldn't have come across in the way he did. But my point is that once you've blown the start like that, a safety car start with everybody around you within 6 centimeters of you, your job then is just to keep everything as neat and tidy as possible, make no move that is unpredictable, stay in the middle of the road and let everybody do what they want to do around you, because all bets are off. You've blown the start. Don't even try to be aggressive going to the first corner. That is the reason that the shunt occurred, and that's the reason Oscar Piastri got a penalty, because they took a snapshot of long after Antonelli had committed the crime. They took a snapshot of the first corner and said, oh, it must be Piastri's fault, which is completely ludicrous. And you know, Mark said, as he said, he was still in complete control of the car, A and B. It had picked up lots of crud on the left front by having to go so near the pit wall to get past Antonelli. So no wonder the thing locked up. And 1010, will Behrman be in a Ferrari come 27? Might even be in a Ferrari come 26, I think, the way he's driving. He's just driving beautifully. I'd love to see him there in 26. But you know, more likely 27, I guess. Lewis will want to see what this new car is like in 26. But you know, if the car's terrible, if the car's about where it is now, Lewis may not see out 26. And then again, I think they'll put Behrman straight into the car. What a great job he's doing. What a fabulous drive again in Brazil. I mean, you've got to take him seriously now. It's a really, really good racing driver. I mean, he and Antonelli were obviously teammates at ART in Formula 2, and he was pretty good alongside Antonelli. But you thought then, Antonelli's very good, isn't he? I mean, rookie coming in. We know how good Behrman is. And obviously Vesti against Behrman was pretty close as well. But now, if you take into account the cars they're driving, Behrman is looking just as good as Antonelli, in my opinion, if not better. Cabrito, he would have had a 30-second lead if he'd started from pole. I'm not quite sure who we're talking about there. Maybe Max? I don't know. But he didn't start from pole. Who are you talking about? Sorry. If you're going to say something like that, refer to what it is, because you know, other people ask questions and then we don't know what we're talking about. That's the unfortunate truth when clowns pull the strings, have no idea, shameless. I think he's talking there about Elkann, I think. Yeah, and let's put that into context. Gianni Agnelli, his maternal great-grandfather, I think. You know, Agnelli was a class act. and he was around just enough to give the support that was needed. I mean, if he came anywhere near Monza, the whole place went berserk. He didn't have to say anything. He was just Gianni Agnelli, and he let everybody get on with it. And it's odd. I think I've said this before. It's very odd that John Elkann hasn't looked at the way his maternal grandfather operated when it came to the race team, and just done the same thing, something that his grandfather would approve of. But to meddle in something about which he obviously has no idea is, I don't know, what is it? I don't know. Ego? No, couldn't be that. Rob 2. Not everyone accepts it, but having 4 World Drivers' Championships and doing some incredible performance, of course, changes the way he's being looked at. I think we're talking about Max Verstappen there, are we? Yeah. BL4, this is going back to Elkann now, up and down. Well, he runs the oldest Formula One team in history. I hope he knows what he's doing. Not that I agree with his statement. So, Kabitru says, Fred Vasseur runs the team. Elkann is just an annoyance he has to deal with. Well, yeah, but, you know, it doesn't help saying that. I mean, we all know that, but it doesn't help the situation, does it? How are they going to manage that? That's the thing. Spicy King says, "How I still believe in Oscar." Well, anybody that doesn't believe in Oscar Piastri as a talent capable of winning the World Championship, not necessarily this year, but is not watching racing, because he is that good, definitely. And whether or not he will this year, unlikely now this year, but it's still difficult to understand exactly how much he went off the boil and why he's kind of still off the boil. I can only, as I've offered my opinion, which is I think he got so swamped by the whole Lando Norris telemetry studying thing that his driving style has changed. He makes more mistakes as a result. He's more on the edge. His new style doesn't leave him anything like the same margin for creating a sweet spot as his old one did. He's harder on tyres, not as good under braking, not as precise as Lando, and it's all a mess. If he'd developed his own style, as Isaac Hadjar is continuing to develop his own style alongside Liam Lawson, then I think he'd be much better off. I hope over the winter that's what he does. Hope he goes back to it. Nick Woodbridge. Hi, Peter. Is it possible to draw connections between how drivers are operating and how I am as a classical musician on a wind instrument? I often find myself contemplating my inputs and notice that one of the hardest things is paying concentration throughout long pieces, for example. Well, it's an interesting point, Nick. And I did highlight Max's concentration levels after his win in the US Grand Prix, where he was in free road a lot of the time on his own, and yet was metronomic with his lap times and the way he was managing the tyres and extending the stints as a result. So concentration is a very underestimated subject these days. It's kind of taken for granted that concentration is no longer an issue. The drivers are so fit, but of course fitness doesn't have an impact on your emotions or your mental stability, and concentration is very much affected by those, and it's helped by the shorter stints and not having to do a full Grand Prix distance without a pit stop, obviously, because the point where you might start to get a little bit mind wandery, you've got 4 laps for your next pit stop, so that kind of focuses the mind. But in general, it is a very important point, concentration. In terms of a relationship between music and motor racing, I've always felt it was a mistake to marry upbeat heavy metal music with fast cars, in other words, Formula One cars, and that particularly slow motion shots, even more so in the wet, lend themselves to very graceful music, appropriate music that goes with the flow of the car, and music that captures the way a driver like Verstappen can slow down everything that's happening around him and falls into this zone of feeling the entry of the car, of the corner before he's even got there, knowing the transition point in his mind before he's got there, knowing how he's going to feel the understeer and then cure that understeer at that specific moment, all happening very slowly in his mind. Music needs to be compatible with that, I think, in Formula One. And very rarely happens, because most of the filmmakers stroke, directors come in and they think, noise, people, colour, and it goes sideways as a result, proverbially sideways and really sideways too. Edgar Domlenders. Hi, Peter. In a weekend where there is a Grand Prix and a World Rally Championship event, like the past weekend, what do you do to watch it all live? What do you prioritise? Sleep well enough for all that? Thank you again. Thank you very much. Well, what you didn't add was the Bridgestone Cup golf at the Alhama Signature Jack Nicklaus course nearby, which is also taking place over 18 holes, which was won by Jay Windsor. So that took a lot of time as well. And yeah, and watching the Rally of Japan was, I mean, it wasn't that difficult because I kind of lost interest in that when it all went sideways for Terry and the Hyundais. Not that I'd love to see Elfyn Evans win the championship this year, and I really hope he does. It's going to be close going into Saudi Arabia. But I was, with the rallying, I just sort of caught up with it the next morning. The Formula One was obviously a little bit more time drenching, and yeah, but thanks to Mark helping me do some earlier vids around free practice and so forth, I was able to make the second vids a little bit shorter than it might have been, and as a result I was in bed by sort of 2 or 3 in the morning, which was quite good. Not bad anyway, but then having to get up straight away with the dawn to do the Bridgestone Cup. So yeah, he beat 68 players to win that. It's good. And I was caddying the whole way, as you would. Hi, Peter. This is from Jasper. I get depressed thinking of the future of Formula One with the emphasis on the Formula One movie, Wags and Drive to Survive. How can the sport live on? Well, just do your own thing. And when in doubt, go and watch Rust Bucket Motorsport on YouTube. That'll revitalise the senses. Nothing does the job like Rust Bucket if you really want to get back into what it's all about. And then go and, I mean, I'm sure guys like Max and Charles and Lewis don't know, and even George don't know about Rust Bucket Motorsport. But if they did, I guarantee it would be compulsive viewing for all of them. Nick Woodbridge says, sorry for the overly personal question, was just discussing it with a couple of other musicians. Yeah, no problem at all. And I think being musical actually for a driver is an asset. Not necessarily critical, but if you can whistle and sing in tune and you've got a feel for a rhythm and a beat, it can't hurt in terms of everything you need. All the other things, they always list the attributes, you know, whether it be the reflexes, the eyesight, the balance, whatever. Having that sort of feel for music can't be a bad thing either, I don't think. And, Jim Clark played the violin, didn't he? And Elio De Angelis and Francois Sever were very good pianists. And probably find today some of the other guys are quite good on the old musicians, musical instruments. Bucky Nick, has Lando stopped sharing data with Piastri while he stopped using his own data while racing? I don't think any of that's happening, no. I think McLaren have a very strict and open policy of information and discussion, and I don't think from the point of view of engineers anything has changed. But I think in terms of in one ear out the other, maybe some things have changed with Lando and or Oscar. I think in Lando's case it's gone out the other pretty quickly. Hopefully that's what he's doing. In other words, what Oscar's doing is not, it's important to him in terms of strategy, in terms of how competitive Oscar is, and if he's quick, obviously Lando's going to pay more attention. But if he's not, Lando needs to is focusing much more on his stuff. And from Oscar, I think it's gone the other way. I think a lot more is staying there, and he's thinking, what is Lando doing? How am I going to beat Lando? What is he doing here? He's not thinking, I want to be Oscar and go out and beat him. He's looking at, partly, I think he's probably looking at data to see how to beat him, which I think is a mistake. This is another, well, this is ridiculous. This is from my mate Cameron, giving me a super chat, totally unworthy of it and unnecessary, Cam. You shouldn't be doing that, mate, but it says, for the GOAT. Thank you so much. It's very kind of you. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you. Hurricane OK says, a comeback for Lewis might just be if he's willing to come back and race for Ferrari next year. Yeah, good point. Good point. That would be his comeback. Yeah. Tell John Elkann that. I'm not sure he'd see the funny side of it, would he? Ivan Borg. Hi, Peter. I agree that Oscar is an unwanted distraction for Lando in the other car, but if he overcomes him, is it possible he'll be stronger for it? Yeah, maybe. But is it worth all the heartache and aggro? You know, I put another way, if they'd kept Daniel Ricciardo in the car, do you think Lando this year would have sort of said, oh, this is easy, and gone off the boil and wouldn't have improved as a driver and become a bit sloppy and let it get away from him and let Daniel win more races than he should? Do you think that would have happened? I don't think so. I think Lando would have thought, wow, this is an amazing car. Let's go, guys. Let's win this world championship. And so you have to put it in that perspective. If any driver, if Max Verstappen is alongside Isaac Hadjar, he's going to have to work a little bit harder than he would against Sergio Perez or Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson, for sure, because Isaac's a better driver. But not that, there would be that much difference. If you had put Charles Leclerc next to Max Verstappen, then there's all sorts of issues because they're very similar and Charles will want to be going quicker than Max every race, every qualifying session. And that's when it becomes difficult. And that's when you're not going to get the best from Max because it would start to be a distraction. Yeah, Rob too says Lewis had car damage, was sliding all over the place. That's correct. And said, he's going to have a shunt if he continues and the car's terrible. And he was right, he got accident damage. But the accident damage was because of the first corner, and the first corner shunt was because he qualified where he did, So there you go. Colin Cowdrey, hi Mr. Windsor, would you please compare Oscar's driving to Max's? Is he a short corner driver? What can Oscar do to be champion if he can't this year by learning from this year? He was, I would say, when he was first at McLaren, he was somewhere near Isaac Hadjar in terms of how he was creating corners and what he was doing. He was pretty good. And he has, therefore, it's clear that he has the feel and the touch and the suppleness to do that. But the more competitive the McLaren became, and the more one-on-one the fight with Lando became, potentially to win races in the World Championship, the more Oscar, I think, has started to look at what Lando's doing with the car every time he's got beaten by Lando and started to change the way he drives and started to push in areas where he's normally never pushed up until now, like braking super late or turning in a bit wider to get the power on sooner so he's got a higher minimum speed, higher than Lando's or whatever it is. All those things that are not really that important. And I think that's what's happened. I think he's a victim of the amount of information that's there. And every time he's not as quick as Lando of analysing it too much on data and not enough just getting in the car tomorrow and driving the way he wants to drive it, his way. And that's it, And I just hope over the winter that he goes back to that. And the learning will be not to do that. The learning will be Oscar Piastri. Don't be a Lando Norris clone. But he potentially is a short corner driver, definitely. I wouldn't have said much more than Hadjar, about the same as Antonelli on slow corners, I think. But the potential to become that sort of short corner driver on faster corners as well. But as we saw in the race, even compared with Max, Antonelli's not that short yet on slow corners. I mean, Max is just so far ahead of the rest. It's ridiculous. Charles is the only one anywhere near him. Only driver anywhere near him at the moment, in my opinion. And Nilan Kawajadadna, I hope bad mispronunciation, Peter. Why McLaren didn't go for a different strategy for Oscar from the beginning of the race, according to you, or even at least after the penalty? Yeah, well, the same reason they didn't in other races, Austin or Mexico, because I think they're very worried about the political upheaval of running the two cars on different strategies now. And if one of them, due to that strategy difference, gets an advantage, the effect it'll have on the team in these last 3-4 races going into the World Championship. It's because of the situation McLaren have created. They need to be very conservative, that's what it appears anyway, with the strategy choice for both drivers. But yeah, you're right. It's they're tightening up is the right phrase, because they're just not allowing all those other possibilities to come into play because they're too concerned about the politics. And it's more the politics around Lando and, suddenly putting Oscar on a different strategy that works. That's going to cause a lot of problems with Lando. And I think finally we're seeing they just don't want that. Anna Katharina Kalin. And McLaren seemed to make the one-stop work with Oscar, but he seemed to have a lot of deg, while Lando had really steady lap times on mediums. Is there still a gap between them in terms of time management? Well, I think, let me think about that. I mean, when you're in front and you've got no traffic, it's much easier to manage the tyres. So that always has to be taken into account. And if you're chasing and you've already had a lock up into turn 1 and you're using dirty bits of road in order to stop cars behind suddenly getting advantage if you've had a slight jink out of a corner, that's always going to damage your tyres and enhance tyre management. So I don't think, just from the way they drive, I would imagine Lando's got better tyre management than Oscar now, because Oscar has more lockups, he has more jinks out of corners, even when he's on his own. He's just a bit more spiky in everything he does, it appears. And as I say, I think that's because he's gone away from his natural way of driving, which was somewhere near Isaac Hadjar's early on in his McLaren career. And so now, if you take a snapshot, absolutely, Lando has better time management. But if you put Lando in traffic and Oscar's out in the front of a race, which could happen in Vegas, for example, then you'd suddenly say, oh, wow, Oscar's time management's really good. So you also have to take a lot of these things into account, I think. And bear in mind, used tyres against new tyres as well. Some of them are a bit more used than others. But it's amazing how used their tyres were. It's like 7 laps old, wasn't it? Whereas Max is going from new set to new set. It was brilliant. Ivan Borg 5501, Peter, I've not heard anyone else in Formula One media mention the Antonelli wrong gear mistake at the restart. I'm sure someone will do eventually, but they're taking their sweet time. Well, I don't know. I'm amazed that they didn't or wouldn't or haven't, because it was pretty clear, and it was pretty clear when he was doing it live. You know, I imagine that's what everyone was calling. And you could tell by the way. And what sparked my interest was the way his body language, really, the way he was always trying to stay on Lando coming up the hill there. You can see him doing this. You know, he's trying to make sure that Lando doesn't get away from him. And I'm thinking, I thought, well, it's going to be interesting to see what he's doing there. What revs is he using and how often is he on the brakes and how's that compare with what Lando's doing? And as soon as you saw that, I said, oh, well, he's in third gear. What's going on? So, yeah, I don't know. I can't understand why. I can't offer an opinion as to why nobody else is talking about it. But it happened. So there you go. NAFTA 007. Honda said a couple of years ago that a newer power unit wouldn't bring significant power gains, as Mercedes did with Lewis's car at the end of 21. Yeah, well, I think, and Mark Slade has said the same thing, isn't he? You know, this era in which we're at, this turbo era, you're not going to get a massive power gain. I can't imagine anybody would have been thinking during Max's race in Brazil that much of that was due to the power unit change. It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. It was all to do with managing or getting the medium tyres to work on new sets of mediums, the track at that point, and the decreasing fuel load, and obviously some changes they made, as you inevitably always would, because it didn't work on Saturday. Try something else for Sunday in terms of suspension, maybe ride height, whatever. All those things would have come into play, but it certainly wouldn't have. It's not accounted for by the power unit change. Never has been, never would be. And I can't imagine anybody would even think that, really. I don't know what anyone else was saying about that, but to me the power unit was just, yeah, well, you know, might as well do it because he's P16 anyway, so we've got nothing to lose. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the old days with the Cosworth engines, and probably the same with the Renault engine era, certainly with Hondas, with Nelson Piquet at Williams, for example, when Nigel was there, it was in Nelson's contract as number one driver that he always got the best Honda engine based on their dyno figures in Japan. Not the dyno figures in the dyno we had at Didcot, but in Japan, in Toshigi, I think. And so, yeah, for a long time in Formula One history, everybody's known that there's one engine that's going to be better than another, and which is better than a third. And Cosworth engines were notorious for that. And there were many builders as well, whether it be John Nicholson or John Judd or Alan Peck or Cosworth themselves. So many different builders of Cosworth engines in that era. And every engine was different, had different torque curves, different revs, everything. Not in terms of valves, maybe pistons sometimes, but there were always differences. Today, as I understand it, it's incumbent upon the engine builder, supplier, Mercedes, Ferrari, not Renault because they don't provide for anybody, or Honda, to ensure that their factory engine used by the factory team is identical to the engines used by their customers. And the FIA actually check that. So I find that quite amazing, really, that they have to do that. It's quite good. I mean, it explains how McLaren can go and win the championship, beating the factory team with the same engine. That's for sure. But that would never have happened probably in the Cosworth era. Well, it did, I suppose, in a way with James Hunt a little bit. With John Nicholson was the first builder. He was really good, John Nicholson, very fast racing driver. That Lincar Atlantic chassis that he built was really good. And what an engine builder he was too. Just fabulous. Ivan Borg says, real shame we have no way... sorry, I'm just reading about these super chats just to make sure. No, I haven't read these super chats. Oh, yeah, I have. Peter, okay, sorry, I'll go back. Real shame we have no way to see what Max is doing on the brakes. We can see or hear the inputs, but I think a lot of his edge over the other drivers is found under braking. Yeah, and not by late braking, that's for sure. It's all by... late braking, he's braking as absolutely as late as he can do in order comfortably to be at the rotation point when and where he wants and get to that rotation point exactly as he wants. And his braking will be, that's part of the talent of Max Verstappen, his braking will be exactly in proportion to that. And a lot of it will be, won't be in a straight line, it'll be turning. And that's why you should never measure where Max is braking compared with, say, Lando Norris or Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson or Carlos Sainz, because he's braking to a different point and a different way. And he's not that interested in late braking. He's interested in having a very, very stable platform to enable him to do what he wants to do. But obviously he doesn't want that to be half a metre too soon. He wants it to be absolutely on the knuckle where it should be, given where his tyres are, what the brakes are doing, and the cooling of the brakes. He's absolutely perfect on that. And he won't get it right every time, that's for sure. But 9 times out of 10 he will. And a lot of drivers who just brake in a straight line will be thinking only of braking as late as possible. Oh, I've lost tyre grip. Oh, I've locked the left front. Oh, I've flat spotted the tyre. That very rarely happens with Max Verstappen because he's not interested in doing that. So you're right. It's a great shame. Whether or not we'd ever, from that telemetry that even the teams have, whether you'd see those subtle differences, I doubt very much. You'd need a mega supercomputer that takes into account Max's rotation point, the geometric apex, what other drivers are doing, the tyre wear rate, the brake temperatures, the disc temperatures, the tyre temperatures, and obviously the corner that Max has prescribed. Then you could possibly see a difference. But my fear is that if you just had it digitally, you'd just be looking across a line at everybody where they brake, and it would tell you nothing. Well, it would tell you something, but what it tell you would be wrong. And that potentially is where Oscar Piastri has gone wrong in comparing his data with Lando Norris. Because Oscar is capable of driving the way Max does into a corner, whereas Lando typically has always braked in a straight line. And so he's probably seen Lando braking later than he is. And he started to brake later. And then it's not working with the curve, so he's now starting to brake in a straight line. And because he hasn't done it very much, he's turning in from a wider point. And he sometimes catches a left rear on the curb or whatever. You know, all sorts of things can come in. Cabrito. Lewis would do a whole lot better in the car Sainz was driving. LOL, you got at the end of that. I'm not quite sure if you mean what I've just said there is, of course, a joke, or whether you mean, hello, everybody, have a nice day. Lewis would have done a better job than Carlos Sainz last year. He might have, but I mean, Carlos had some very good races last year, and he was quick. You know, he was a very good number 2 to Charles Leclerc. Let's put it that way. So it wasn't a question of Sainz is not as good overall as Charles Leclerc, therefore we must fire him. Which is what basically they did. It was a question of saying, we got Charles Leclerc, we got a guy who's almost as good, what a great team. Instead of which they thought, he's not as good as Charles Leclerc, we'll get rid of him, we'll get Lewis Hamilton, and we won't get Adrian Newey. We'll defocus on that, we'll focus on getting Lewis. I don't think that's any better. 15547 Jada, hi Peter, what's for dinner? Well, it's 1:30 here, so if we have anything, it'll be lunch. And for me, it won't be anything too exotic, I'm afraid. It'll be a toasted cheese sandwich with, I don't know, mango chutney probably, and a glass of ice water, and maybe an apple. How's that? Really boring. But it was my wedding anniversary yesterday, so I know we're going out to a nice fish restaurant on the beach tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, do you have any anecdotes, something you could tell us about John Watson? Well, one of my heroes. I was a massive John Watson fan long before I met him or even saw him drive. When I was still in Australia, reading about him in Motoring News and what he was doing in that old Lotus 48 Formula 2 car and what he'd been doing in Ireland. He was one of the first drivers I wanted to see and meet and watch. And he was. I met him on the motor racing showboat on the River Thames, which was the racing car show goes to the water in back end of 71 when I was in England for 3 weeks, holiday from Australia. And he was the first autograph I got, John Watson. And what a hero. He softly spoken, very, very intelligent. I think a bit too intelligent for his own good, maybe, as a racing driver. But then again, Nicky was very intelligent, so that didn't hurt him. He learned quite a lot from Nicky, I think. And he was in awe of Bernie, probably a bit too much, I think. He was just thinks, whatever Bernie said, John did. And I don't think John, stood up for his own patch quite enough. But when you look at how he beat Nicky at McLaren on circuits like Detroit and Long Beach from the middle of the grid, when that car was really good, that's how good John Watson was. He was really outstanding. Beautiful driver, very, very nice touch. He definitely a front end driver, nothing too flamboyant with the rear of the car. And if he had a front end, he was super quick. He was as quick as James Hunt for sure. And of course, when he won his first race, you want an anecdote. Obviously, he'd promised Roger Penske that he would shave his beard, which Roger didn't really like the beard. And being clean cut as the Penske team was. And when he won that first race, he came down to the breakfast room the next morning and Roger didn't recognize him, literally didn't recognize him. He just looked at him and looked away. Beards. So yeah, a lovely guy and loves his fishing down on the south coast. He was very close friends with David Purley, who we sadly lost in a aerobatic accident off the coast of England. Very good racing driver as well. He was from that part of the world. John loved that part down there in Sussex near Goodwood on the coast, and loves fishing and loves his music. I remember John, when digital music became the norm and streaming came in, I remember having a big discussion, just listening to John tell me how the purest music was still vinyl, and that he could easily tell the difference between if he was in another room. No, if he's sitting in a room blindfolded, somebody played streamed digital music against vinyl, he could tell immediately which was the vinyl. And we were talking about music earlier. John, I suspect, therefore, is pretty musical. I've never asked him about that, but I think he is and was. But literate, articulate, very good commentator, very good racing brain. I don't know why more people don't use him, actually. I think he's, right up there with the best in terms of ex-drivers who can talk about racing. And he should be given a lot more space and time. Really good. Good guy. Great guy. A lot of time for John Watson. Fayez 1001. Hi, Peter. What do you think about the Stroll and Gabby incident? What should Gabby have done to avoid the accident? Didn't watch it. Wasn't aware of it. I just thought, those two are together. There's going to be tears there for sure. And I was focusing on something else at the time, I think. So sorry, I can't give you an opinion, to be honest. Lance Stroll and Gabby, yeah. I mean, Gabby is good though, isn't he? He's very good. He's maybe a bit too much local pressure in Interlagos on him. I'm surprised that he didn't get more from the car, given that it was a weekend when Sauber magically, through black magic, had grip, as we know from Nico. And yet he didn't get much from the car, which I can only put down to distractions in Brazil. It's easy to do that, very easy to do that. It sounds like a pompous team manager saying that. Probably nothing of the kind, but anyway, that's what I'm going to put it down to. Stroll, you can't predict what Stroll's going to do next, ever. He's just, law unto himself, isn't he? Quick Sticks 8771. Hi, Peter. Do you think if Oscar held his line and didn't brake to avoid a collision, it would have been deemed a penalty-free incident? It's all, as as Mark was saying when we chatted, they've got this stupid, the only way they shouldn't have any rules at all and penalties, in my opinion. They take everything on its own merit. And he's quite right there. But because they want to have something in the sporting code which looks as if they're doing something, they've got this thing where they measure the guilty party by who is in front. And of course, that is a very difficult thing to measure, because you might be measuring against a Max Verstappen who's not braking in a straight line. You've got cambers on the corner. What angle you're measuring it from, what radius you're looking at. So all of that is nonsense, in my opinion. I think, I don't know. I think we shouldn't overcomplicate this. I mean, Oscar Piastri had to go on the dirty side of Antonelli because Antonelli was going 10 kilometers an hour slower, if not more. It was down by the pit wall where it was dirty. And as we know, he didn't lose control. He braked at about the right moment. The left front locked up, partly because there was dirt on it, partly because the track falls away there. But he didn't lose control. It was incumbent on Antonelli not to run into Piastri. He'd lost the position to Piastri. There's no doubt about that. And he should have been in the middle of the road, letting Piastri go. So that was it. What the stewards would have wanted Piastri to do, I guess, is long before the braking area is come out of the throttle, say, yeah, after you, Claude, come on then, you go, and then just filter him behind Kimi. I guess that's what the stewards wanted him to do. But he's a racing driver. He's never going to do that in a million years. If Antonelli makes a bad start, that's his problem. You know, Piastri's completely correct in darting left and going down the inside. Of course he is. That's what we want from racing, isn't it? We don't want all this after you, Claude stuff. But that's apparently what the stewards want. That's the only way the incident could have been avoided, if Piastri had come right out of the power long before the braking area and let the guy go. Marcellus, TKW. Hi, Peter. If you were lead strategist of a Red Bull, would you have kept Max on the medium tyres until the end of the race, or would the team made the right call? Well, I have actually answered this question earlier, and I did put myself in that position. And I did, when it came up, and Max, as soon as Max said, I haven't got any grip, tell me what to do, guys, I remember saying, well, if I was there, I'd put him on a set of softs now. Definitely. In the last few laps, light fuel, go for it. Max Verstappen, fired up, mega. That's what I would have done. So I think whether it was the right call, we'll never know, because had he stayed out on mediums, maybe he could have finished second. I doubt he would have won it, but he could have finished second maybe. So I don't know. No, I do know. That's what I would have done. I would have gone softs. Cabrito, Mekis says Max is the best sensor they have. Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. That's correct. So that's something good, he said. Something not so good is saying to the public, oh, we didn't really need to change engines, but we've done it because he's at the back of the grid and it's a good thing to have going into the last three races, because it appears as if that is in breach of the cost cap regulations, as Stella is pointing out on behalf of McLaren. We'll see what happens there. But, you know, Mekis appears to be a little bit too much of a good guy, not enough of a hard, tough, annoying racer, which are the best racers in the pit lane are the very annoying people that, you know, you never really want to have a long conversation with, because you know you're going to put your foot in it somewhere along the line. And, you know, there are plenty of those. Not plenty, there's about 6 or 7 of those in the pit lane. And I don't think Mekis is one of those. I think Christian was behind that sort of, you know, very genteel exterior. I think he was pretty switched on, actually. One wonders whether the Mekis mistake of saying that about the power unit change would have been made under Christian's watch. I wonder that. It's a good question, isn't it? Jonas Bjork, 6593. Wait, we've been spending years yelling for consistency, and now you've got it. That is wrong too? Sorry, I'm not quite sure what that's all about. You're talking about adjudicating shunts? There's no consistency there at all. Tell me, when penalties are given retrospectively for Charles Leclerc nearly driving Max into the grandstands after the restart in Barcelona in 7th gear, then I might listen to consistency. So there you go. Mongol Prince 48. Hi Peter, you're a legend. No, I'm not, but thank you very much. What's going on with Lewis on the main straight with contact with Colapinto? Was very clumsy and very unlike him. Did he? Oh, okay. Didn't know that. I was just talking about the main straight. Yeah, I'd have to, again, I didn't actually watch that much of Lewis's race. I just thought, well, where he is, he's bound to have shunts and get involved with everybody, and I'm not, you know, whatever happens, happens. That was kind of what I was thinking about him, and I think it was kind of right. The only thing I'd say is that, and I've said this before, post 21, and that is that Lewis spent from 2007 through to 2021 actually qualifying, generally speaking, on the front 2 rows of the grid and having a very good race car beneath him. Obviously there were exceptions, but generally speaking, that's where he was. Yes, he was brilliant in traffic in Formula 3 and Formula 2, reverse grids. He was just scythed through the field, very, very good. And he could read what was going to happen next with the car in front long before it had happened. And he would usually double guess them. Very, very good. He's not doing that as much now, post 22, in the midfield, where he's sometimes qualifying. And it's understandable. I mean, if this was Formula 2 now and Colapinto was there, Lewis would probably have a pretty good feel for how Colapinto drives and what he's likely to do. But it's not Formula 2, it's Formula 1. He's having a miserable time at Ferrari. He probably has no clue how Colapinto drives. And when he gets near him, he's thinking, oh, what's all that about? That's all I can imagine is going on. And he hasn't got the same sort of homework drill that he used to have in Formula 3 and Formula 2 vis-a-vis the other drivers on track. He's just Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari, and he drives the way he wants to drive at any given moment. And he probably doesn't even know the difference between the back of a Gasly Alpine or a Colapinto Alpine. I think he probably finds it quite difficult. That's nothing unusual. Nigel never knew the difference between any of these back markers either. No, it's a red car, blue car, I don't know, green car, got in the way. Martin Lee, more rookies out the old, except Max. More Rockies, you said there, actually. Rockies. You mean Rocky as in the original nickname of Keke Rosberg, or Rockies as in the Rockford Files, James Garner, pre-Grand Prix, or do you mean rookies? You want more rookies, less of the old? I'm not sure that I want that. I love seeing, well, depends what you mean by the old, yeah. I mean, Lewis has probably been around a bit too long, and so, well, no, it's unfair to say that. Lewis is a class act in many, many ways in Formula One's DNA, and so let him go in his own time. Fernando's been around a long time, but he's just about to get an Adrian Newey Aston Martin, so he's not going to leave, and he's going to be quick next year. Believe me, he will be quick. And an Andy Cowell Honda, we shouldn't forget that, as I said earlier. And who else old is there? Nico Hülkenberg. Yeah, he's doing a pretty good job there. But then again, I'd rather see Carlos Sainz in that team, as I've said all along. Paul Marshall. Peter, as a Kiwi, going to have to make this the last one, guys, because I've been going a good 2 hours. And the cheese sandwich beckons. As a Kiwi, it has been great to watch Liam Lawson this year. Do you think he will retain his seat, and which drivers apart from Max and Hadjar would Red Bull keep? Red Bull overall, you mean? I think he will keep his drive. He's starting to get it together now, isn't he? He's being as quick, if not quicker, than Hadjar on occasion, and racing well. Very good drive in Brazil for the reasons we went through earlier in this live stream. And he's very much of the Red Bull idiom. He looks like a Red Bull driver, doesn't he, with the jeans and the whole thing. So, yeah, I think he will keep that drive. And it's going to be, I think Hadjar will get the A drive. And I don't think Yuki might get lucky. I just can't imagine he'll get that Ford drive there. So I guess that'll be Lindblad, won't it? Lindblad and Lawson. And there'll be Verstappen and Hadjar. Or am I missing something? Unless they do the right thing, in my opinion, and get Carlos Sainz back and give Hadjar another year at Racing Bulls with Lawson and have Carlos Sainz in the other Red Bull A car. So there we go. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me and for being part of this live stream. It's about you, and it's your questions that bring all this to life and to light. And it's not just me ranting. Although there's been a little bit of that at the front of the live stream. But anyway, I noticed that I've actually not downloaded my. In fact, more than I not downloaded it, I managed to. Before you get rid of a laptop, you're supposed to download everything, which I did, but I forgot the stuff I actually had on my desktop, which is all my videos to do with the live streams. The ending, for example, which I don't have right now. So when I say goodbye, it's just going to go black. I hope that's okay. So thank you very much, everybody, for being a part of it. And we'll be back again with another live stream next week as we look forward to Vegas. I have Mark Slade looking forward to that circuit with us as well. So that'll be great. And then, of course, it is the Vegas Grand Prix next weekend. But this weekend, it is... it's another golf tournament, actually. Need to go and do some practice with young Jack.